Hello, people. I want to show you something I'm working on in FMOD these days. I'm working on an indie game project, and in adaptive game audio, we're constantly talking about ways in which to accomplish the loop, meaning the repetition of musical material for as long as we need it to within a game context in interesting and effective ways. Sometimes that means a simple solution, sometimes that means something more complicated. Today, I have an example that is very simple, using just what we call linear looping, meaning that the music is repeating in a straight line loop over and over again until it needs to stop. There's not a lot of bells and whistles here. It's a simple setup. You can see that I have the tempo and time signature and some destination markers that I'm not using for anything other than just helping me to organize myself as to where the different musical sections start and stop. And then a loop region here that spans between measures 5 through 28, which is the bulk of material that's just being repeated over and over again. But if you notice, I don't have everything baked into one single audio file. Instead, I've parsed it out into a bass loop and a separate melody module that contains a unison fiddle and flute melody. So let me play through this musical example once real quick, just so you can get an idea of what it sounds like, and then I'll talk a little bit more about an important but small, subtle technique to get a refined sound. Okay, and I'll stop it there. So this would keep looping on its own over and over again until there was a game command causing it to end. Now, there are many different ways. FMOD is one of those beautiful platforms where there's not just one way to skin a cat, so to speak. You can accomplish the same end result using multiple different methods, and this is the way that I've chosen to do it here. So if you're paying attention, the flute melody carries over after the end of our loop region before the next iteration of the loop begins. Now, if I were to bake this melody into the bass loop and had just one single audio file instead of these two parsed out like this, I would get something akin to this sound. So let me just start here, and let's listen to the flute melody and what happens to it when the loop starts or restarts. I choked it out, right? The flute melody had a kind of an abrupt, unnatural sounding end. Now, this is part of my problem because I wrote the melody so that the last note occurs on the downbeat of the following measure, starting in measure 29 or back in measure 5 when the loop starts. Now, I could go back and just rewrite the melody so that the melody concludes somewhere at the end of the phrase before the start of the next one. And that would certainly solve the problem to some degree. But let's say I really want to have this note that ends on the first beat of the next bar. And there's a reason why, because I think that it yields a more seamless transition that makes the music sound more naturalistic and more polished. So the only little trick that I used is simply to bounce out or export the melody lines as their own audio file to bring in as its separate module. I've loaded it into a single instrument on its own track, and then I select asynchronous, which means that whenever the single instrument triggers the audio, it's going to run asynchronously regardless of where the playhead is for the event as a whole. So if you notice, the playhead goes up to the beginning of measure 29, and because it's within a loop region, it automatically bounces back to what I've marked here as A, the downbeat of measure 5. And it's going to keep doing that every time until there's a stop event triggered. But having this audio file run asynchronously means that it's going to run the moment it's triggered, which I've lined it up on the grid so that it triggers at the right moment. And since there's no tempo changes or any other major issues I have to deal with in this particular project, it's going to run in time with the bass loop until the playhead jumps back to measure 5, and it's going to finish out its phrase. If you go back and watch the first time I played through this song, you can watch the cursor for this single instrument as it continues beyond the downbeat of measure 29 when the playhead jumps back. And so this is just a very simple solution, but elegant for creating a more seamless transition over the loop points, so that we have a continuous song that flows from one iteration of the loop to the next without an obvious break point or loop point.